finance. For the first time at a COP, I feel like I don't need to do the primer on methane. It has finally risen to the top of the agenda, thanks to the very hard work here. We've had the first ever summit on methane and non-CO2 greenhouse gases, co-hosted by the US, the UAE and China. 155 countries are now in the pledge, more than the seats we have in this room. So this is a strong foundation for ambitious action going forward, and we have extraordinary leadership in the room. Without further ado, and I hope you've caught your breath, sir, I will give the floor to the United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, Mr. Methane.
Well, good evening, everybody. Does anybody know where they are? I'm not sure. Thank you all for being here. We really do appreciate it, and really appreciate those comments. Rachel, where'd she go off to? Rachel, where are you? Thank you so much. We really appreciate everything you're doing also, and great to have you be part of this here tonight. I really want to thank the Clean Air Task Force for hosting this event, and to Inger Anderson and the UN Environment Program in particular for the great job you guys have been doing in terms of following up on all the pledges and implementing the Global Methane Pledge itself, which has really excited people and should. It's astonishing to me, having had the privilege of leading our team's negotiations in Paris, we never talked about it. I can't even tell you, somebody mentioned it to me. And that was during a period of time when we were all saying, oh, you know, we've got these really hard to abate sectors, of course, and we do. And cement and concrete and aluminum and aviation and shipping and trucking and so forth. And particularly those that, what do I need to do? Lean into it. Okay. Most people think I lean into it too much. But that's all right. Okay. So it not only is now mentioned, but I think it's front and center. It was astonishing to me to learn that obviously methane, we all know, is responsible for about half the heating of the planet. And yet, only about 1%, 2% maximum, but 1-point-something% of all climate money goes into dealing with methane. That is up until now. It's astonishing. And all of us kind of, you know, we were aware of flaring and we were aware of venting, but nobody sort of jumped in and said, hey, man, that's just burning, you know, burning good gas that at least might be sold. And I shared with the president of Mexico this year as we worked on, you know, them getting engaged and doing things. They were losing $2.8 billion a year to their budget for just burning it away. So there are lots of different reasons to be doing it. The most significant, of course, is that it's so destructive. And now we have the challenge of fugitive gas, which is unleashed by permafrost thawing, and it's just going out there. I was with Bill Nelson today, the administrator of NASA, former senator, a colleague of mine, and we were talking about the programs that are coming into place, which will only be growing, and the daily, even hourly. We have satellites that go around in about an hour and a half. So every hour and a half as they circulate, they're going to have the ability to pinpoint all these mega events that have been taking place unassuming, you know, unaddressed, and they will be able to address constant leaks, but also they're going to be able to look at people's footprints, the carbon footprints of international companies that have promised to do Scope 1, Scope 2, or so far in Scope 3. It's going to be visible to everybody. And people, average citizen, you're going to be able to tune in and watch some of it on satellite, but you're going to have access to all of this information. And if you go to nasa.gov, you can begin to dig into that and see. So you can run, but you can't hide. That's the bottom line. And it's going to limit greenwashing, or at least give us the ability to name and shame. And we have to be prepared to name and shame. Because I don't know about you, but I'm getting more and more militant and more frustrated with the business as usual and the unwillingness to do what everybody knows we human beings have to do. This is us. We're the ones creating this. And we're the ones who are passively kind of allowing, the extension of time that's going on. And we got to change that. There's no other way to do this. In the end, it's up to us. We have to behave like the adults that our children and grandchildren and people are asking us to behave like. And I think, we're going to have to get tougher with ourselves as we go forward. So I'm grateful to our friends from the European Union who are the co-sponsors in the announcement of this when we put it on the table in Glasgow. We appreciate the strong partnership, and I thank all of you coming and everybody's continued resolve to tackle the methane, which is the fastest, simplest, least expensive, most efficient way of being able to rapidly reduce emissions on the planet and keep at least a 0.1 or 0.2, ultimately, degrees of warming. This is our grab. This is the place to make the gain and prove that we can win the battle. So 2 days ago, the US, China, and the UAE convened the first ever summit. It was pretty remarkable, and I was heartened to see the progress we made in just 2 years since we launched. We now have 155 countries in the Global Methane Pledge, thanks to Kenya, Romania, Angola, and just this week, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan joined. And I regret, I don't think I told you all, but in a conversation I had with the president of Kosovo, she said she's joining, so we can have one more tonight. I'm sorry about that. And 5 countries are now joining the US and EU as global methane champions, including Micronesia, Canada, Germany, Nigeria, and Japan, who have all committed to help elevate this critical agenda. And at the Methane and Non-CO2 Summit, countries, philanthropies, and the private sector unveiled, we thought we were going to be able to get 200 million. That was our goal. Well, we wound up and unveiled over 1 billion in new grant support since COP27 for methane mitigation, including 255 million for the World Bank's Global Flaring and Methane Reduction Partnership. And I talked to Ajay twice, once last night, once again today, and they are raring to go and be partners in this. $200 million for the enteric fermentation accelerator and other groundbreaking programs that are going to cut emissions against all across methane emitting sectors. I'm also looking forward to hearing some of our speakers today who have worked extremely hard over last year to mobilize this funding, and it's more than triple previous annual methane grant funding to deal with this challenge. So this funding is literally going to unleash billions needed in investment to reach the collective goal under the Methane Pledge of reducing 30% by 2030. And we're turning the promise of the pledge into real resources and real action to reduce methane emissions across key energy, agriculture, and waste sectors. And over 86 countries, covering over half of the emissions and including China, have national methane action plans in place or are engaging with our partners in order to develop them. So we ask partners to back up these national plans with firm policies and regulations to curb emissions. I talked about the benefit of the simplest, fastest, et cetera. But here's the bottom line, folks. We cannot keep 1.5 degrees alive, which is so critical, without cutting methane from oil and gas in parallel, as we continue also to rapidly decarbonize our economies. And that is happening. I'm struck. This is not, I'm sorry to go on, but this, we just had a shipping meeting at the Shipping Challenge yesterday. And boy, are they moving. And they will have, because of the IMO this summer, raising the stakes in terms of the guidelines and standards. And because of the shippers themselves, Yara, Maersk, MSC are stepping up. And they're ordering carbon-free ships. And they say that within the next 20 years, and the target is 2040, we will actually turn over the entire fleet of ships on the ocean that are now equivalent to the 8th largest country emitter in the world. So this is real, substantive, and it's going to have a profound impact. So on Saturday, last Saturday, the United States finalized our standards to sharply reduce methane emissions from oil and gas, and that's going to achieve nearly an 80% reduction of emissions in our emissions and in our country. And the EU unveiled its first ever methane regulations in the energy sector last month, including a methane standard for its imports. So other countries are going to make exciting announcements right here at this meeting tonight. So, my friends, this action does not stop in the energy sector. We are forging new partnerships and programs to address methane from waste and from the agricultural sector. And this week, we worked with partners to launch the Lowering Organic Waste, or low methane, and announce a significant new support for innovation to cut methane from livestock, which we're increasingly becoming aware we can do. The benefits go way beyond climate to health and economic development, and I know our speakers are going to touch on that. So, action on greenhouse gases does not end with CO2 and methane alone. The United States and China have agreed to include all greenhouse gases in economy-wide 2035 NDCs. And the COP28 presidency has also called for parties to do the same, and we should, all of us, be calling on everybody to live by the same value of responsibility that brings us all here to this meeting. We also have to ramp up our efforts to tackle hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, through the Montreal Protocol, N20, and other harmful super pollutants. And I'll just close by saying this is our best hope of near temperature relief, which we need. 2 days ago, 3 days ago, was announced this past year is now the hottest year in human history. I don't know about you, but I can still remember every year of the last 30 years in which we've been measuring with clarity, and how many times has each decade been marked by 7, 8 of the years being the hottest year in that decade. We now have a serial. The third, second, and first hottest decades are just running, absolutely tracking each other for the years that are going by. If that isn't a warning, I don't know what is. And I do not want to be hearing that the next 10 years wind up being the hottest 10 years. We're now 40 years, 4 decades of providing the world with the hottest years. We got to get our you-know-whats in gear. The stakes are huge and the world is watching us. Let's roll up our sleeves and really get the job done. That would be the great mark of COP28, and I hope we'll do that. So I'm not sure who's, you're going to do this, Rachel, from the podium. All right.
Well, we're going to go across the Atlantic now, and so first of all, I'm going to give the floor to the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Maros Šefčovič, who is a climate champion for many, many years, and following him, the European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simpson. So if the two of you go, and then maybe I don't need to keep getting up and down because we're short on time. After that, the UNEP Executive Director, Inge Anderson, who needs no introduction and has been a champion of these issues for decades in different roles. Then to the Minister for Environment and Climate Change of Canada, who's hugely important in the methane struggle, Stephen Guilbeault. And then last but by no means least on this panel, Federated States of Micronesia's Secretary of the Department of Energy and Emergency Management, Andrew Yatilman. So I'm going to leave it to you, responsible climate leaders that you are, to stick to time and to go one to the other to the other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and first and foremost, dear Secretary, dear John, thank you very much for the opening remarks. I also would like to greet all the honorable ministers, esteemed panelists, guests, and all of you ladies and gentlemen, because of course for us it's a pleasure to not only attend this ministerial meeting, but it's a pleasure to be co-hosting it alongside Special Envoy Kerry, because it gives us the opportunity and pleasure to thank you all for these remarkable and important efforts in tackling climate change. So I will follow the example of Secretary Kerry. I will lean into it so you will hear me well. And I also would like to underscore that the Global Methane Pledge demonstrates how political commitment can generate policy attention, technological advances, and importantly, financing within a short time frame of 2 years. Today, indeed, is a good opportunity to consider our collective achievements, and I'm happy that Special Envoy Kerry has laid out some of these key developments over the last 2 years. The main message I want to give today is that we still need to speed up action on the ground. The technology to do so is not already available, but, and that's very important, it's already economical. And in the European Union, we continue to strengthen our domestic regulations and actions in line with our Global Methane Pledge action plan published last year. And we are in the final stages of adopting first ever methane legislation for the energy sector, comprehensively covering oil, gas, coal, and emissions. And my colleague Commissioner Simpson will elaborate on this groundbreaking legislation in a second. But we also have to look at other sectors, as it was highlighted by Mr. Secretary, than energy. In the waste sector, the European Union has extensive experience going back almost 30 years, and we will further expand our work. For instance, as of 2024, separate collection of organic waste will be compulsory in all EU member states. By separately collecting the waste, it can be recycled and valorized. And on Saturday, I was happy to participate in the launch of the low methane initiative in the waste sector, and I once again want to thank Special Envoy Kerry for initiating that action and look forward to further collaboration. Another very important sector, agriculture. Here, under the recent update of the EU's Common Agriculture Policy, 387 billion euros of funding is available for our farmers, of which 40% are dedicated to climate action. And in addition, a group of experts from our member state is about to finalize a guidance document on best practices for reducing methane emissions in the sector. And if you allow me, I would like to conclude by important message on our international commitment. Here we continue to champion methane emission reduction efforts of our international partners. In the past years, the European Union has jointly with our member states contributed 220 million euros as a part of the methane finance spirit. As a former sprinter, I can tell you I very much like the name. And I am also pleased to see that the European financial institutions are also investing significantly on this international methane abatement. Almost 1.8 billion euros with B from the European Investment Bank and more than 200 million euros from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development will go in support of our partners. So there is also financing available. And therefore we encourage all Global Methane Pledge participants to work on national plans and identify what we need the most, concrete projects to use this money to the fullest. Beyond direct funding, the European Union is also providing technical and policy support, and the EU welcomes the methane data revolution driven chiefly by the International Methane Emission observatory that I invite all of you to support. My last words are expression of gratitude to our US partners, our recently announced Global Methane Pledge champions, and of course to all of you for a successful year in implementing the pledge. And I very much look forward to continue our work in the year ahead as our target date 2030 is around the corner and is fast approaching. So I very much thank you for your attention, and as Rachel suggested, I pass the floor to my colleague, Kadri.
Good evening, and thank you, Maros. I had a chance to look around, and I think that the number of people gathering here is a clear testimony that our Global Methane Pledge has been a success since we launched it 2 years ago in Glasgow. And together we have created the building blocks of this initiative. We have nurtured it with our engagement, and we have succeeded in expanding its membership. And now it's time to show how the commitments we took 2 years ago are turned into action. And when it comes to energy, my field of responsibility, 70% of methane emissions from fossil fuel operations could be reduced with existing technology, and 80% could be implemented at no net cost. And with this in mind, just a few weeks ago, the EU adopted the first ever EU methane regulation for the energy sector. And the new law sets out world-class standards for measurement, reporting and verification, loss detection and repair, and bans venting and routine flaring. As you know, the European Union is the largest importer of fossil fuels, and therefore we had the responsibility also to deal with our imports. So first, we will step up our diplomatic outreach with super emitters. And thanks to our collaboration with the Methane Alert and Response System managed by the International Methane Emissions Observatory, we know who they are. So second, we will guide purchasing decisions with the publication of methane performance profiles of each company and country exporting to the EU, with information on the geographic route and associated methane emissions of gas, oil and coal. And third, importers will have to show that producers were subject to equivalent measurement, reporting and verification requirements, which are based on the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, one of the main successes of the Global Methane Pledge. And finally, from the beginning of 2030, imports into the EU of oil, gas and coal will be required to meet a methane intensity threshold. And we hope that this legislation will provide an important incentive to fossil fuel exporters around the world to tackle methane emissions. And let me add that we are working with many of you to create a globally aligned framework to measure emissions, helping not only market players to choose the cleanest gas available, but also producing companies to take prompt action to mitigate and collect the emissions. And on top of this, Maros already mentioned our funding. We are providing more than 200 million through Team Europe, of which the European Commission will provide 175 million. And this includes support to the International Methane Emissions Observatory. And let me also once again highlight the role of that European Investment Bank. They just this year have invested over 1.7 billion in methane-related projects. And finally, next COP29, we will launch a You Collect, We Buy roadmap that can be implemented worldwide. So we really want to incentivize companies to take action. And I think that from our side, since the launch of the Global Methane Pledge, the European Union has shown that commitments can be turned into action. Thank you.
Thank you. And so it's a real pleasure to be here with this line of leaders on this issue. And it's also a real pleasure to be the organization that you have entrusted to actually carry this mandate out. Just the other day, we, together with our friends at IEA, under the CCAC that you are also having entrusted to us, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we issued a report on the imperatives of cutting methane from fossil fuel. Like Secretary said, I'm not going to tell you the ABCs of why this is important, but I will say that if we do this immediately targeted methane abatement, not only are we doing good for the climate, but we are also preventing premature, about our report found 1 million premature deaths due to ozone exposure, 90 million tons of crop losses due to ozone and climate damages, and 85 billion hours of lost labor due to heat exposure by 2050. And since today is Gender Day, let me just say that women and pregnant women in particular, and the elderly obviously suffer greatly from heat exposure. So just to recall that these are real issues. Now, we have said throughout from UNEP's side, as we were asked by everyone to be the holder of the methane portfolio, that yes, we are very, very happy to hold it, but cutting methane is not a get out of jail card. It is an important measure. We have to reduce flaring, venting, and leakage, but we also have to decarbonize our economies. It's not an either or, it's both, and it's now. But because methane has a short-lived pollutant that is very potent, as you all know, we need to take that out. And it's very important that those who sign up understand that this is not a thing that we are going to let go of. Therefore, we have to be very serious about the promises that we do make. And that is why we at UNEP, when we have accepted to be this, we are insisting on transparency. We're very grateful to the EU for having given us money for operating the International Methane Emissions Observatory, IMEO, which, based on satellite, and it's available to you all, provides observations. And today I can announce that we are also launching, together with our friends at IEA, as well as the Netherlands Institute for Space Research and the French Energy Research Institute, the Methane Alert and Response System, which will be run by IMEO and which will pinpoint exactly where the leaks are from. Either we will go directly and notify the government, or we will notify the company. But notify, we will. And just to mention that IMEO, the International Methane Emissions Observatory, is also running the, and thanks to the support, Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. It was created in 2005. Excuse me. It is implemented and created by the CCAC in 2005. And it provides a company a framework for companies to look at systematically and credibly manage their emissions. The partnership today has 115 companies with assets in more than 60 countries on 5 continents. And it represents nearly 40% of the oil and gas production and over 70% of liquid natural gas flows. So data transparency is what you have entrusted us to do. And if we come ringing your doorbell about methane leaks, don't hold us, don't blame us. We are only doing what you asked. But we have to be very, very clear that data alone is not enough. And that's why the Climate and Clean Air Coalition has this comprehensive system to help countries deliver on methane abatement, from policy support to institutional strengthening, to sector transformation, and to policy-relevant research and analysis. And I'm also very, very proud to say that the CCAC is now providing secretariat to the Global Methane Partnership, the pledge, excuse me, that we are here talking about right now. So you have entrusted UNEP to do this work for you, and we will continue with the GMP to really, as together we took that collective commitment, but it takes the partnership to deliver this. And I'm very, very glad that you placed UNEP in the center of this work. It is a vibrant community, as we see here with ministers present. And we are absolutely determined to work with you on taking methane out of the atmosphere. We realize, as you said, Senior Vice President, that it is very difficult to deal with the agricultural and the waste sectors, but we salute the EU for the new legislation that we've done. And we are very, very excited to see how that will work, because taking the organics out is obviously the way to go. So merely to say thank you for the trust, and you have our absolute commitment to continue this work. Thank you.
Dear panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here to share with you a very promising announcement from the Government of Canada. But first, let me tell you about a company from my hometown, Montreal, called GHGSat. Founded in 2011 by Stéphane Germain, the company was recently featured on the cover of Time magazine for its groundbreaking work in monitoring methane emissions from space. Like me, Stéphane began his career as a passionate environmentalist. While I focus on environmental activists and now politics, Stéphane dreamed of innovation. GHGSat is the only private company or space agency capable of attributing methane emissions to individual installations. This is a real source of national pride, but also it shows that innovation is essential. Today's announcement is the result of strong collaboration between the federal government, provincial and territorial government, as well as Indigenous communities and Canadian industries. It's also the fruit of ongoing cooperation with partners like the United States, who understand that by tackling methane emissions, we're activating one of the most powerful levers we have against climate change. Canada and the US were the first countries to establish national regulations on methane in the oil and gas sector. And here at COP28, just 2 days ago, the US EPA announced changes to methane regulations. It gives me great pleasure to announce the publication of proposed amendments to our national regulations, which further enhance our rigor and ambition. These amendments will enable us to meet our targets for the Global Methane Pledge. Before I begin, I just want to offer a bit of history. In 2018, the Government of Canada published our first methane regulations for the oil and gas sector, which aim to reduce these emissions by 40 to 45% by 2025 from 2012 levels. To achieve that goal, we work with 3 of our most implicated provinces to develop agreements where the federal regulations could be stand down in favor of provincial rules that align with those federal goals. And this has been a success story. It gives me great pleasure to say that we're on track to surpass our goal ahead of schedule. So today's announcement builds on past success. I'm very happy to announce the release of even more ambitious draft methane regulations for Canada's oil and gas sector, consistent with the International Energy Agency's recommendation. We're now aiming for at least 75% reduction for the oil and gas sector by 2030 in Canada. The accuracy and understanding of how much and where methane is emitted and that is reported properly is critical to achieving methane targets. To address this, the Government of Canada will also be announcing $30 million to establish a methane center of excellency to improve our understanding and reporting of methane emissions with a focus on collaborative initiatives to support data and measurement. We know we can do this. Our approach is in step with what our neighbors in the South are doing. We're broadening the scope to include a wider set of sources, from the point the natural gas out of the ground to where it enters the pipeline that brings it to the market. We're eliminating most exclusions from the existing regulations. This means that virtually all of Canadian facilities handling natural gas will be covered. The goal is to eliminate the escape of methane during production, from venting or routine flaring. We're also establishing new performance standards for leak detection and repair, focusing on sites with the highest risk. And we're addressing problems such as blowdowns and other potential large methane releases. All this while ensuring the energy industry, both in Canada and the US, remains competitive on the world markets. That is the key. Not only can methane emissions be captured and achieved at a low cost for the oil and gas companies, but that captured methane can then be sold or used as a source of energy. We're all in this together, and I want to highlight the collaboration and ambition we're seeing from Canadian provinces and territories, as well as from Canadian oil and gas companies to tackle the methane emissions. 12 major Canadian firms have already committed to lowering their methane emissions to near zero by 2030. And as of Saturday, they've been joined by 50 oil companies representing nearly half of global production that have pledged to reach near zero methane emissions and end routine flaring in their operations by 2030. They understand the need to become among the cleanest producers in the world to compete in a decarbonizing global economy. They see the new business opportunities arising from Canada's clean tech sector, which offers affordable solutions to the globe's oil and gas producers for methane abatement. They also know that reducing methane emissions is the right thing to do because it's critically important in our efforts to fight climate change. Over the next few years, our methane regulations should result in an estimated $12 billion in avoided damages globally, not to mention the huge benefits on air quality and population health. Canada is also working to advance methane reduction and carbon capture in the agricultural sector, and we're developing regulations aimed at reducing landfill methane emissions by 50% by 2030 from 2019 levels. So I'm encouraged by the global collective progress towards achieving the Global Methane Pledge. 2023 has been a big year for action in methane in Canada and around the world, and we will continue working with all countries to reach and even exceed our shared goals. Colleagues, this is one of the biggest opportunities that we have to act quickly on climate. Thank you for all your help.
Good evening, colleagues. Only 2 years ago, many of us gathered in a room similar to this one to launch the Global Methane Pledge. This year, many actors are getting on board to reduce methane emissions in this sector. We are encouraged by this forward momentum. You may wonder why a small island nation like Micronesia is so passionate about methane. The reason is that climate change is pushing us to the brink of extinction. Our people, our culture, and the islands we have inhabited for over 4,000 years are endangered by rapidly rising temperatures. The world is not merely warming, it is beginning to boil. And for islands in the Pacific and around the world, that means deadly heat that threatens our communities, coastal erosion that tears away at our homes and infrastructure, and severe storms that batter our towns. We are no longer safe enough on the lands and on the waters that we love. The people of Micronesia, like many vulnerable places on Earth, are no longer potential victims of climate change. We are present victims. Of all the existing solutions to the climate crisis, action to address methane is the fastest way to turn down the heat. It can buy the world time to decarbonize and buy vulnerable countries like ours time to put in place the life-saving adaptation measures that will protect us. The Global Methane Pledge is one of the keys to controlling the climate, but as a voluntary measure, let us be honest, it will not be enough to achieve the massive cuts needed to slow down global boiling. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community has spent more than 30 years talking about climate change, but our efforts so far have not succeeded. And as a result, this year, we hit all-time record-breaking temperatures worldwide. To truly and effectively address the climate emergency, it is time to turn voluntary pledges and good intentions into more robust, action-oriented approaches with clear goals that deliver concrete results. To achieve results at a global scale, we should look to the successful endeavors of the past and present, such as the Montreal Protocol that matches goals and timeframes with information, resources, and accountability mechanisms. The successes of Montreal that were eloquently celebrated this past Sunday at the Methane and Non-CO2 Summit by Special Envoy John Kerry are why we have championed that treaty for decades. Colleagues and friends, we are on the right path here. Let's keep up the good fight. I wish to acknowledge each and every one of the countries who have joined together under this pledge for your courage to be here and your commitment to this cause. We cheer on each and every one of you in the work ahead. In particular, we give 3 cheers to the US and China for their recent Sunnylands agreement that demonstrates how, in times of crisis, cooperation and trust prevail. We cheer the many countries that have been brave enough to include specific methane pledges in their NDCs and national policies. You show the world that where there is a will, there's a way. We cheer the governments and other institutions that have put money towards methane mitigation, betting on this as one of the best investments for climate. We want to see this money well spent and look to institutions to support with transparency and good financial governance to make sure that resources hit their mark. Friends and colleagues, let us consider, as we move into this new phase of methane action, how we can work together on a path to certain success. The safety of my people and that of small island states around the world depend on it. Innumerable species depend on it. The lives of future generations depend on it. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. To the distinguished panel, thank you for your leadership. Sometimes we take it for granted, but you've put methane where it needs to be, and now we have to move forward. I'd like to ask you to leave the stage now. We've got 3 other panels that we're going to get through in 45 minutes. So often methane is hurry up to slow down. Make a pledge, don't follow through. It's going to be different now from COP28 onwards. So while the distinguished panel is exiting the stage, I'd like to invite up to the podium State Secretary Stefan Wenzel of Germany. And the photographs are going to have to be over there. Thank you, sir. Thank you. The CEO of the Global Methane Hub, Marcelo Mena. And the World Bank Global Director for Energy and Extractives, Demetrios Papathanasiou. And if you're not one of those 3 people, then I'd appreciate it if you would exit the room or sit down. Yeah, I'll do. Thank you very much. It's a manel, but it's okay. I'm going to wave the manel wand, and we're okay. Gentlemen, you don't have as much time as the distinguished panel before you. So in 2 to 3 minutes, go straight to the heart of what you are going to do to turn pledges into action, and thank you for your leadership. And first of all, we go to you, the State Secretary, and then following that, Marcelo, and then finally to Demetrios. Thank you very much, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm speaking to you as one of the 5 champions of the Global Methane Pledge with a message for our common projects. Germany intends to provide €20 million for methane mitigation as a contribution to the methane finance sprint. €8 million of that package are intended for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Germany's successful cooperation with the CCAC in the waste sector will be continued and will be expanded to assist partner countries in setting up the regulation of the fossil fuel industry too. Germany can look back at a success story of tackling its methane emissions in the waste sector by introducing a complete ban of organic waste in landfills 20 years ago. For old legacy landfills, it is further on compulsory to capture landfill gas. When biogenic waste is not treated properly and ends up in landfills, we are not only emitting dangerous emissions, but we waste precious energy and fertilizer resources too. With our contribution to CCAC, we intend to deepen and widen our engagement in the waste sector. Countries interested in joining us on this journey are welcome to reach out to CCAC to seek assistance. €12 million of our methane contribution is intended for the International Methane Emissions Observatory, the IMEO, to increase our knowledge of methane sources and our ability to surveil the practices of individual companies. Investments and regulations to achieve methane mitigation are essential if we want to reserve the current trends, especially in the energy sector. There is a massive mitigation potential. The message is clear. Methane emissions from fossil fuel operation must fall by 75% by 2030 to keep 1.5 alive. The GMP Secretary has greatly recognized this potential and dedicated one of today's panel to this topic. Let me just highlight a few points. Renewable energy and energy efficiency are a way forward, and all companies should rethink their fossil fuel engagement. But while downsizing the fossil fuel industry and phasing out by mid-century, we must nevertheless invest in cleaning up dirty business practices. Super emitters should be aware. We see the venting and flaring, and we will react to it. Existing infrastructure need to comply with rigorous leak detection and repair programs and must stop routine venting and flaring. My dear EU colleagues already mentioned the EU methane regulation. This regulation on tracking and reducing methane emissions in the energy sector is an important step ahead. And this legislation is a clear signal to all producers of oil, gas and coal exporting to the EU. And this legislation is a clear signal. Fossil fuels producers must be transparent about their emissions by using equivalent monitoring, reporting and verification standards, and the EU will set a maximum methane intensity level for oil and gas imports. But have in mind that a cleaner production does by no means justify further expansion of exploration of new oil and gas fields. The science is clear. New oil, gas and coal exploration are not compatible with limiting climate change to 1.5 degrees. The future are renewables. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Rachel, for the invitation. And I just wanted to say that every tenth of a degree matters if you compare this year's warming versus last year's warming, and the impact that we felt, it matters, and we need to pull that emergency brake on warming, and the fastest way to do it is actually tackling short-lived climate pollutants, in which methane is a really important one of them. So 2 years ago, the Methane Hub was established. $210 million were to be deployed between 2022 and 2025. The Methane Pledge has grown. We have the US and China bilateral agreement and the commitment to work on methane and non-CO2 pollutants. So therefore, there's a new commitment from the philanthropic community, including Sequoia, SIF, Bezos, High Tide, Hewlett, Quadrature, Climate Foundation, among others, to contribute an additional $450 million these next 3 years. And partners like the CCAC, UNEP, and others will be crucial. So these NDC seize on the opportunity to put these policy levers on shortening warming fast. In the EU adoption of the import standards, there's great opportunity. If we meet it, CATF has done an analysis of this. 33% of all oil and gas emissions globally can potentially be reduced and get a fifth of the way of meeting the Global Methane Pledge. So we believe that we need to help support implement that. And the same goes with the Near Zero Charter that was announced a couple of days ago, because we need transparency and verification. So that's why last year we funded the launch of Mars along with Bezos Earth Fund, and this year we're launching the Methane Data to Action campaign, which with an additional $10 million from the Global Methane Hub, and hoping to reach at least $100 million for that purpose. This can help fund initiatives like Mars or the Waste Map, and we need to really seize on the opportunities of this new era of accountability. Next year, MethaneSat and Carbon Mapper will join GHGSat, and so the days of self-reporting will soon be over. But we believe that pointing out the problem is not the only solution. Obviously, we need to fund this, and we're happy the new announcement of funding that the World Bank has established. This is important. Supporting companies to reduce emissions is crucial, and technical assistance is also important. Only 2% of climate finance go to methane mitigation, despite it being nearly half the problem. And while we know that we could get 70% emission reductions in the oil and gas sector with net or zero or no cost, the recent report that we launched with CPI on methane finance is there's zero multilateral funding on energy mitigation, and we need that to be higher. So yesterday we launched Low Methane, which will hope to mobilize $10 billion in funding, and philanthropies and GMH really help put that together also. And with the funding of the GMH, the IDB will commit to $360 million in funding and using at least 30% of methane mitigation in their waste portfolio. Along with IFAD, $500 million of the portfolio will go to methane, and we hope that the World Bank will join us in this, in other sectors like agriculture. Finally, enteric fermentation accelerator, $200 million towards that. We're looking to lower the cost of mitigation, bringing benefits to farmers, so we could help the sector become more resilient, efficient, and more income to communities. The important thing is, nobody's delivering, but with our approach, we'll know the next time the satellite passes over. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. More than 20 years ago, the World Bank established the Global Gas Flaring Reduction Facility. And the focus of that program and the partnership was made so that we could reduce routine gas flaring from the production of oil and gas. And the reason we have been successful, and we have noticed that visibly in the last few years, even though oil production has been increasing, routine gas flaring has been going down. So we can see that this is a mechanism that works, and the way it works is that we can monitor from space where flaring takes place. We can report it. We have been reporting it for the last 20 years, but at the same time, we continue to work with oil and gas companies, especially in our client countries in the developing world, providing technical assistance, helping them with regulations, helping them with technologies, and know-how to actually reduce routine gas flaring. So when the Global Methane Pledge came about at COP26, we really had the vehicle ready where we could act in the same way on methane. Now, the reality is that the technology on monitoring methane is much more difficult, much more complicated from space, but it is beginning, it can be done, and we're looking forward to continue and work with the partners on remote sensing. But at the same time, we will follow the same approach. We will work with local oil and gas companies in the countries where we work. We will help them with technical assistance. We will help them with technology. And I wanted to really thank everybody who put trust in the World Bank. We now announced that there is $255 million to support this effort for the global flaring and methane reduction. And I want to make sure that I don't forget anyone. The government of Germany is a contributor to that, Norway, the United States, and of course the United Arab Emirates with a very significant contribution. But as well, we have oil companies, oil and gas companies, BP, Eni, Equinor, Oxy, Shell, and TotalEnergies, who are also coming with funding in this. And more importantly, they're coming with all the will and the ability to share best practices that they're developing, their technology, and the way they run things so that we can all together reduce methane. There's a lot that needs to be done. The challenge is daunting, but I'm really optimistic and happy that the World Bank can contribute to that. My last word is that I would really like to thank Secretary Kerry's team that has worked very hard to put this together, and it's really a pleasure to be in this moment right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Germany for consistent leadership on the subject over many years, and thank you to the Methane Hub for their leadership, and obviously to the World Bank Group, re-energised and reinvigorated since Glasgow. So now we go to the next panel. I'd like to invite up Minister Silveira, Alexandre Silveira of Brazil. Thank you. Please come on up. And then the Minister of Petroleum of Egypt, Tariq El Moura. Thank you. And then finally, Minister Ekpo from Nigeria. Minister Silveira will fala Portuguese. Please put your headphones on. Fala Portuguese. Thank you. And ministers, I'm sure you're tired of this, but 3 minutes is sort of 3 minutes. All the lights will go out at 8 o'clock, and we've got another panel following you. I appreciate your leadership, and I look forward to your concise comments. Thank you.
Meu cumprimento a todas e a todos presentes, cumprimentar meus colegas painelistas, o ministro de Petróleo Tarek, do Egito, e o ministro de Petróleo da Nigéria, Erpo. Destacar a alegria do Brasil de estar participando da COP, a oportunidade de mostrar a nossa matriz energética limpa e renovável, 88% da matriz de energia elétrica do Brasil, graças às nossas potencialidades, mas também das políticas públicas implementadas nos últimos anos e também os nossos esforços para descarbonizar a matriz de transporte e mobilidade através dos biocombustíveis. Agora estamos diante de mais uma importante iniciativa para a redução e mitigação das emissões de metano pela nossa indústria de petróleo. O Brasil é um dos maiores produtores de petróleo e gás natural do mundo. Ocupamos hoje a 9ª posição global no ranking e estamos nos preparando para sermos o 5º maior produtor global até 2029. Destaco: o pré-sal brasileiro é um dos mais eficientes do mundo em emissões de CO2 na sua produção. A produção do óleo do pré-sal brasileiro emite a metade do CO2 da média mundial. E não é por acaso. As nossas leis e regulamentos associados aos aspectos ambientais de segurança operacional da indústria do petróleo estão entre as mais completas, rígidas e bem aplicadas do globo. Nos últimos 20 anos, reduzimos a queima de gás natural nas unidades de produção de 12% para 3% registrados atualmente. É sinal de sustentabilidade. Isso graças à importância dada ao tema pelo Ministério de Minas e Energia e pelo Conselho Nacional de Política Energética Brasileira. Também temos regulamentação firme e fiscalização efetiva pela Agência Nacional do Petróleo, Gás Natural e Biocombustíveis. Falando especificamente do metano, sob a orientação do presidente Lula, a Petrobras, a maior empresa de petróleo e gás natural do país, faz parte da parceria para a redução de emissão do metano para a indústria de óleo e gás. Parceria de Petróleo e Gás Metano 2.0, OGMP, coordenado pela Organização das Nações Unidas. Esse protocolo tem fortalecido as empresas a gerirem sistematicamente as suas emissões de metano provenientes das operações de produção de petróleo e gás. Com políticas públicas concretas, vamos atingir o nosso objetivo. Além disso, o Ministério de Minas e Energia e ANP participa do grupo de trabalho internacional para estabelecer uma estrutura de mediação, monitoramento, relatórios e verificação das emissões de gás do efeito estufa. Essas medidas reforçam o anúncio que fiz em julho, ao lado da secretária americana Jennifer Granholm, sobre nosso compromisso de cooperação conjunta em energia limpa. E queremos mais. Mesmo com as emissões de metano pelo setor de energia no Brasil serem muito reduzidas, estamos dando um passo decisivo no dia de hoje. Queremos que essa iniciativa sirva de exemplo e inspiração para o restante do mundo. Vamos submeter, em 2024, ao Conselho Nacional de Política Energética do país, liderado pelo Presidente da República e composto por 16 ministros de Estado e 4 pessoas da academia e sociedade civil, as diretrizes para a regulamentação das emissões de metano na indústria de petróleo e gás natural no Brasil. A ANP tem o objetivo de concluir a nossa regulamentação até o final de 2025, inclusive contando com subsídios do MMRV. É o Brasil liderando e querendo contribuir com a mitigação da crise climática global. O Brasil, protagonista da transição energética, que nós lutamos para que seja, junto com os países do sul global, justa, inclusiva e equilibrada, com respeito irrestrito ao meio ambiente e gerando os frutos para a salvaguarda do planeta. É hora de darmos as mãos e juntos avançarmos. Contem com o governo do presidente Lula, contem com o Brasil.
Good evening, dear guests, my dear panelists, ministers, Brazilian minister, Nigerian minister, Your Excellencies. We know, of course, that reducing methane emissions is one of the fastest ways to decrease the global warming. I'd like to reiterate that Egypt has joined the World Bank's initiative for zero routine flaring by 2030, and around 30 flare gas recovery projects were implemented. These projects resulted in an annual saving of around $200 million and emission reduction of 1.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. We ran 2 methane measurement campaigns conducted to cover more than 30 sites. The detected leaks were less than the global benchmark, and Egypt has joined the Global Methane Pledge in oil and gas track in June 22. Egypt has updated its indices to include targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in oil and gas sector by 65% by 2030, and mainly through recovery of the associated petroleum gas. The Sharm el-Sheikh Oil and Gas Methane Reduction Roadmap template was announced at the first ever decarbonization thematic day at COP27 last November in Sharm el-Sheikh, which was really inaugurated by His Excellency John Kerry. Egypt's oil and gas sector will complete a detailed methane abatement roadmap as the next important milestone in methane abatement efforts. The detailed roadmap will be developed in partnership with S&P Global and through technical assistance provided by USTDA. And hereby, I am pleased to announce Egypt's intention to develop internal or domestic methane regulations in its oil and gas sector by the end of 2024, as part of developing the sector's detailed methane emission reduction roadmap. I would like also to reiterate the importance of access to concessional finance through the newly announced Methane Finance Sprint to support our methane abatement efforts and projects. Finally, I look forward for enhancing collaboration within the Global Methane Pledge and the sector's partners to continue driving methane emissions reduction. I thank you very much.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is an advocate of just, fair, and equitable energy transition. Nigeria is committed to the global change initiatives, and in 2022, during the COP27, Nigeria made a formal commitment to Methane Pledge. Thereafter, it made formulations, production of guidelines to ensure that methane is kept under control. The guidelines include implement leak detection and repair measures in all oil and gas infrastructures, install flare with high destructive efficiency in order to reduce the impact of leaked and vented methane, establish control on devices that are designed to vent and require their replacement with zero emission equipment. It does go further to formulate a regulation framework to ensure that methane is incorporated into the flare system. To that effect, under my watch, we have put in place what we call gas flare commercialization program, which we have identified 49 flare sites and allocated it to 43 investors to ensure that we reduce flare in Nigeria. Establishment of specialized department, the creation of energy transition and carbon monetization department within the Commission demonstrate a dedicated focus on transitioning towards lower methane emission, emphasizing carbon market development and enhance social governance credentials, directly supporting the Methane Pledge. We have what we call Decade of Gas in Nigeria. The initiative is leveraged on the Decade of Gas initiative to promote low carbon natural gas as preferred choice of fuel and energy in Nigeria. The country is actively steering its energy landscape towards a lower methane intensive path, aligning with the Methane Pledge. On transparency, transparent reporting and accountability, we are committed to consistently publishing comprehensive methane emission data, demonstrating accountability and progress in line with the Methane Pledge. This should be emphasized. So in Nigeria, we are doing everything possible to ensure that flare gas is eliminated, and of course encourage the use of gas to replace biomass. This, to a larger extent, will control the release of unwanted gas or the carbon into the atmosphere. Thank you very much.
How government commitment can accelerate methane reduction in the oil and gas sectors. So thank you. I'd like to invite you to step down from the panel. And having talked about how to sprint the finance and having talked about how to accelerate reduction in the oil and gas sector, the final panel will look at how to advance food security and improve health while reducing methane in the agriculture and waste sectors. I'd like to invite to the podium, please, the Deputy Minister of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia, Aludong, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Google, Kate Brandt, Danone's Chief Sustainability Officer, Henri Broussel, and the Head of Climate Change at IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank, Helene Meirovich. Thank you very much. So, dear panelists, you have sort of 2.5-ish minutes, you can imagine, at this point. But if you could, again, speak in the order in which I introduced you, so to the Honourable Minister of Indonesia, then to Google Danone and to IADB. And after you've spoken, I will hand the floor to Jonathan Banks from the Clean Air Task Force to wrap this up. Thank you very much. Minister, the floor is yours.
Is it working? Excellencies, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the invitation extended to speak at the COP28 Methane Ministerial. On this special occasion, I will put forward Indonesia's ambitious effort on addressing waste methane. The government of Indonesia submitted its enhanced nationally determined contribution, or ENDC, document to the UNEP on September 23, 2022, which increased our target of reducing GHG from 29% to 31.89%, or equivalent to 915 million ton CO2 equivalents, unconditionally, and from 41% to 43.2% conditionally in 2030 compared to business as usual. Within that document, it's also outlined a target for reducing GHG emission in the waste sector by 40 million tons CO2 equivalent in 2030, based on unconditional mitigation scenario, or GM1 we call it, and 43.5 million tons CO2 equivalent according to conditional mitigation scenario, or CM2. In the aim to achieve that ambitious target, especially for the waste management sector, Indonesia has done concrete initiative transforming conventional waste management into more sustainable ways. We hope that through this event, the existing initiative can be scaled up and engage all different levels of society, from the grassroots level to the communal level in the settlements. Methane, together with carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, are the main contributors to GHG emission in Indonesia. Thereby, Indonesia puts particular consideration of methane reduction in domestic solid waste subsector, as reflected in the country enhanced ambition of mitigation action on landfill gas recovery and utilization, composting, and 3Rs, or paper waste, waste to energy, such as refuse-derived fuel implementation, and the utilization of waste to switch from landfill disposal to only residual waste that dumped to landfill in 2040, or zero waste, zero emission target is being planned to be achieved by 2050. As part of national strategy, the Ministry of Environment Forestry encourages subnational jurisdiction to improve organic waste management in the area by implementing environmentally friendly technology with professional management. For instance, the implementation of comprehensive food waste management, methane capture from palm oil mill effluent, or we call it POME, and methane capture from landfill areas. In the context of NDC implementation, Presidential Regulation number 98, 2021 concerning carbon pricing mandated that the NDC target will be achieved under national responsibility with subnational and other non-party stakeholders engagement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I see that those programs and strategies have demonstrated Indonesia's serious commitment to significantly reducing methane emission from the waste sector. And I would like to appreciate collaboration which could support the achievement of methane emission reduction in our NDC. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Good evening. I wanted to begin by thanking Secretary Kerry and Deputy Spec Rick Duke, President Shefkovich, Executive Director Andreessen, and all of our other distinguished speakers this evening. I think it's been a really interesting discussion with a lot of important announcements and perspectives. At Google, we believe that we have a unique opportunity to transition to a more sustainable future by making information more accessible and by driving innovation forward in partnership. Just before COP, we published a report with the Boston Consulting Group, which pointed to the opportunity that AI presents to enable 5 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced by 2030. That's roughly the equivalent of the emissions of the European Union. And of course, as we've been discussing this evening, in this decisive decade for climate action, we need to accelerate progress towards the Global Methane Target Pledge. And we believe that technology, particularly AI, has a large role that can play in accelerating that mitigation. And as you know, historically, meaningful action and investment in methane has been hindered by inaccurate, inaccessible, and incomplete information on the magnitude and location of methane emissions. Actually, as early as 2011 at Google, we began trying to address this data challenge by using the power of our technology in partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund. And initially, we actually attached methane sensors to Google Street View cars. Those are the cars that drive around the world to create Google Maps. And through that information, we were able to give better insights to natural gas utilities around the state of methane leaks in their infrastructure, and also information to local regulators. And this enabled them to prioritize which leaks to repair. So we've been thinking about this for quite some time. And fast forward to today, we continue to believe that methane data transparency remains a core component of driving collective action to reduce emissions on a global scale. And so we're actively exploring ways that technology, in particular AI, can further this work. So that's why earlier this year at UNGA, we were proud to launch a new partnership with the Global Methane Hub, RMI, and the Clean Air Task Force to develop a waste methane assessment platform known as Waste Map. And so with the support of a $5 million grant from Google.org, this platform will include a global heat map of municipal solid waste emissions, a strategic playbook to guide further decision-making, case studies, and a decision support tool for stakeholders. And today, I'm very pleased to share that Google.org is increasing our funding to methane solutions for a total of $8.25 million through an extended partnership with Global Methane Hub as part of their Methane Data to Action campaign. And this will support UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory to develop their methane alerts and response system. This alerts and response system is a new AI-based automated methane emissions detection platform that has alerts and notifications to identify and monitor methane emissions on a global scale. So of course, this funding and investment in innovation is only the start. Many more similar partnerships will need to be developed to effect meaningful change at a global level. So we are excited to see the increased ambition over the last several days and continued momentum for methane mitigation. And we absolutely feel committed to bringing the best of Google's technologies, our funding, and people to accelerate methane mitigation. So thank you very much.
Good evening. First, I would like to start thanking the countries here, and in particular the United States, for their leadership on methane, which is really giving us, the private sector, a strong inspiration. Maybe a few words about Danone. We are a global food and nutrition company, leaders in dairy, plant-based, but also having products like water, medical and baby nutrition. As a leader in dairy, we actually started the methane journey some years ago, because it was part of our green gas emission reduction. However, it was a Global Methane Pledge, which made us realize that we are, as a company, as private sector, we had an opportunity to accelerate action. So in January this year, January 2023, we committed to reduce methane emission from fresh milk 30% by 2030. And you would say, okay, this was actually in line with obviously the Global Methane Pledge, but also on the progress we made between 2018 and 2022, where we decreased our methane 14% in 4 years vs our previous footprint. Actually, how do we reduce methane? We reduce methane at farm level with different levels, which is about herd management, feed management, and manure management. And this is actually a big work because there are a lot of farms around the world, big farms, medium farms, but also smallholder farms with 1 or 2 cows, where we implement many practices, regenerative practices, to actually reduce the methane emission of all the farmers. We are also stepping up industry collaboration. We are very proud to be a founding member of the Dairy Methane Action Alliance, which will be launched tomorrow at the COP, sending a clear signal that methane reduction is a way to future fit the dairy business, cementing actually its place as sustainable diet and as a source of affordable, high nutrition protein. And we are also pioneering partnership to accelerate innovation, because many innovation needs to be done at farm level and needs to be affordable and scalable for the farmer. So we became the first company to join the Global Methane Enteric Accelerator, which actually wants to look for new innovation which can be implemented at farm level within the feeding of the cows for the farmers, whoever or whatever the size of the farm. In our experience from the last year, 2 lessons stand out on methane reduction. First, it can be a triple win for the climate, for the food security, and for farmers' livelihood and resilience. And let me give you an example. In Morocco, we have been piloting transition of farming in smallholder farmers who have today a high methane emission through actually practices such as farmers training, technical support, herd and manure management, and it helped actually reduce very significantly, above 25%, the methane at farm level. So the program starts with 1,600 farmers, and now we are scaling up this year with 10,000 farmers, with both objectives to decrease methane, but also to improve the revenue of the farmers. And we are very excited to work with the Global Methane Hub on an app we are piloting that serves as methane accounting and feed reformulation, which will be available for the farms or the farmer's advisor to formulate the diet for the cow, which enable lower methane emission. And the second learning that stands out for us is the fact that this can only happen through public and private sector collaboration. So in Morocco, this is with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Crédit Agricole du Maroc, GIS, where we have been developing this collaboration. In the United States, this has been through the Climate Smart Commodities program, where we are able to channel 23 million subsidies to dairies, to small and big dairies, to reduce methane, to improve manure management, such as liquid and solid separators, which can reduce up to 25% the methane. So we really do believe that public and private sector collaboration, both on innovation and financing, is absolutely critical to further go in methane reduction.
The lack of circularity and adequate waste management in Latin America and the Caribbean results in emissions of 334 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year, and that's mainly methane. As it was mentioned before, the study of the EPA shows the importance of prevention and of diverting food waste from sewage and wastewater treatment, landfills, and controlled combustion pathways. In that sense, 60% of the landfill food waste is not captured by gas collection systems and is released into the atmosphere. In that context, IDB estimates that around $13.4 billion are needed until 2030 for the sectors, and mostly 70 to 80% is required in OPEX cost. LAC countries also need an additional 4.2 billion per year to reduce financial barriers that difficult the adoption of circular economy by the sector. In that context is that IDB launched its initiative Too Good to Waste. And its main 2 outcomes, first, is to generate waste management improvement and a transition to a circular economy by reducing financial barriers and strengthening institutional capacity. And second, as the first MDB to do this, we have included the reduction of at least 30% of methane emissions in our solid waste operations financed by the bank, in line with the Global Methane Pledge. This is, of course, accompanied by technical assistance and resources from a Global Methane Hub and the multi-donor Aqua Fund that we have. That has translated in the 3 operations that were mentioned before of $360 million that were going to be implemented in Argentina, Ecuador, and Dominican Republic. And it's very important, the case of Dominican Republic, where we're going to close the largest landfill of Dominican Republic, La Duquesa, which is the 5th largest landfill in the world. As we lead now in this coming year as the head of all the MDBs, these examples and this approach, we will try to encourage our partners, MDB, to follow suit. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I promise to be extremely brief. I'd like to thank all of our distinguished guests and speakers, and a sincere thanks to Kate for shepherding us through the night here. Since the first study on methane and its impact on climate in the year 2000, a small group of us has been diligently pushing, pulling, and cajoling to put methane at the top of the climate to-do list. And it's pretty impressive what's happened in the last 3 years. While everything you've heard announced over the last few days here at COP28 and here at the Ministerial is worthy of celebration, we must suffice with only a brief congratulations. After all, announcements don't reduce emissions. What we're seeking to do is the single greatest action we can take to finally start bending the curve on climate. As Inger Anderson said at the Methane Summit, methane is a lifeboat, and we must take it. All of the money raised, the new commitments, and the new partners will mean nothing if we don't go forth from here to develop and implement actions and policies that start cutting methane today. While this year's COP and Methane Ministerial is dominated by the achievements in raising much needed finance, it's our job to make sure that the funding delivers results. At next year's meeting, I want us to be able to list off all the actions that supporters of the pledge have taken and will take to help us collectively achieve the 30% reduction we've set for ourselves. I challenge all countries' supporters to join us in 1 year with methane as part of their NDC, a methane action plan with new policies and initiatives for all sectors similar to what Iceland just recently submitted, and a report on progress to date in meeting our collective commitments. But countries alone won't achieve what is needed to realize the methane mitigation necessary. We need banks and investors to prioritize methane projects and to push their clients to take action. We need philanthropy to continue to build the funding base that supports mitigation projects, research of new solutions, and civil society groups to help drive change and hold us accountable. And we need companies to make methane mitigation part of their culture. From the top to the bottom, methane has to be how they behave and how they act. With that, I wish you a good evening, and I look forward to seeing you all when we come back together in a year, hopefully with a lot of collective actions that we can celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. So thank you, Jonathan. Could I ask you all to leave the room as quickly as possible? I'd like to thank the UN security and technical staff for working overtime, and thank you to the panel.